Some lives fall apart slowly, but mine crumbled in an instant. In the late 1990s, my life spiraled out of control. At 38, I was stuck in a cycle of addiction, using alcohol and cocaine to cope. It all started when my husband left me and our daughter Lisa behind. His betrayal tore our family apart and turned our stable life into chaos. Every morning, I woke up feeling crushed by my failures, unable to escape the mess I'd made. My addiction destroyed my relationships, my responsibilities, and worst of all, my connection with Lisa. Lisa had just turned 18. It should have been an exciting time for her, full of hope and plans for the future. Instead, it was a painful reminder of how much I'd let her down as a mom. My addiction had stolen the precious moments we should have shared. Lisa was my only child, a bright and strong young woman who deserved so much more. Watching her grow up while I was lost in my problems broke my heart. No matter how hard I tried to hide my struggles, she saw right through me. I could see the disappointment in her eyes. She was strong in ways I wasn't, and that made me feel even worse about myself. Nights blurred into drinking and drugs, leaving me sick and exhausted. My body was weak, my skin pale, and my once bright eyes were now lifeless. Every morning I woke up surrounded by empty bottles, unable to remember what had happened the night before. I felt so ashamed and hated the person I'd become. Lisa had to deal with all of this too. She was torn between anger at me and feeling sorry for me. At night, she tried to block out the sound of my crying and the clinking of bottles. In the morning, she had to face someone who didn't feel like her mom anymore. At school, she acted like everything was fine, but inside, she felt lonely and overwhelmed. She wondered if her dad leaving was somehow her fault and why our lives had fallen apart. In her search for peace, Lisa started dating a 24-year-old man who seemed to give her the stability and comfort she was missing at home. At first, I wasn't comfortable with Lisa's relationship. He was much older than her, and the age gap didn't feel right to me. But after everything we had been through, I wanted her to be happy. Over time, he seemed kind and thoughtful, making me think he might bring some stability to her life. He was polite and helpful when he visited, always starting conversations and offering to help around the house. Even though something about him made me uneasy, I brushed it off as my own insecurity. I told myself it was just his outgoing personality, never thinking it could turn into anything more. I was lonely and vulnerable. The attention he gave me felt comforting, like something I hadn't had in years. It wasn't just his words. I noticed how his touch lingered during small moments, like when our hands brushed or his shoulder bumped mine. Each small touch made me feel things I hadn't felt in a long time, feelings I had buried under years of pain and addiction. For the first time in years, I felt noticed, though it came with a sense of guilt I couldn't shake. One evening, while Lisa was out, he stopped by the house. The quiet room felt heavy as I poured him a glass of water. Our hands touched briefly, and I felt a spark that made my heart race. We sat in the living room, chatting casually about the weather and stories about Lisa. But after a while, the mood changed. His gaze lingered on me, and his voice softened in a way that felt different. "You're so strong," he said, leaning forward, his eyes holding mine. "It must be so hard to do all of this on your own. Raising Lisa and keeping everything together. It's impressive. I don't think you give yourself enough credit." His words caught me off guard. They were kind, but they felt deeper, more personal. I didn't know what to say at first, so I forced a laugh. "Oh, I'm just doing what I can. There's not much choice," I said awkwardly. He leaned back but didn't take his eyes off me. "Not everyone could do what you've done. You're remarkable." The way he spoke made my heart flutter, a feeling I hadn't had in years. I tried to brush it off with another laugh. "You're being too kind. It's just life, I guess," I said, trying to stay calm. Then he reached out and placed his hand over mine. The air between us felt heavy, almost suffocating, as I froze. His touch was warm and deliberate, and it sent a wave of mixed emotions through me, unease and something else I didn't want to admit. "You deserve more," he whispered, his eyes locked on mine. The moment felt charged, like the air was electric, but before I could react, the sound of a car passing outside snapped me out of it. I quickly pulled my hand away and forced a shaky smile. "I think I should check on dinner," I said, standing up quickly to break the tension. My voice was unsteady and my legs felt heavy as I walked away. The weight of what had just happened stayed with me long after he left, the silence in the house louder than anything he could have said. As days went by, I noticed Lisa seemed less interested in him. The way she used to talk about him with excitement was gone, replaced by a distant tone. At first, it was small things, ignoring his calls or giving vague responses, but soon it became clear she was pulling away. Then one day she told me they had broken up. Her words were so sudden that I didn't know how to react. I expected her to be upset, but she wasn't. She brushed it off like it didn't matter, as if their relationship was just a small part of her life. Her quick recovery surprised me. Instead of feeling relieved, I found myself uneasy. I couldn't stop thinking about him, the man who had shown me the attention I hadn't felt in years. The fact that he moved on so easily stirred feelings of jealousy and sadness I didn't understand. One evening my phone buzzed. It was him. His voice was soft, almost sad, and he talked about how much he missed Lisa. He said he felt lost without her, like he didn't know what to do next. There was something raw and vulnerable in the way he spoke, and I found myself listening closely. I tried to comfort him, telling him things would get better and encouraging him to move on. But as we talked, the tone began to change. His voice became gentler, and the pauses between our words felt heavy, as if there was something more he wanted to say. "I don't know how to do this without her," he said, his voice trembling. "You're strong," I replied awkwardly, unsure of what else to say. "You'll figure it out." The silence that followed felt endless, filling the space between us with an intensity I couldn't ignore. When he spoke again, his words were quiet and hesitant, almost like he was afraid to ask. "Can we meet, just for a drink?" he asked. The question hung in the air, carrying more weight than it should have. It wasn't just about a drink. It felt like a step toward something I wasn't sure I could handle. My thoughts raced. The loneliness I'd been fighting, the guilt warning me to say no, and the fear of what this could lead to. But the need for connection was louder than my doubts. Before I could stop myself, I said the word that would change everything: yes. That night, we met at a small, quiet bar on a side street, the kind of place where people went to be alone. The dim lights and soft hum of conversation made it feel private. We ordered drinks, and as we talked, the conversation flowed easily. We shared stories, some funny and some serious, and with each passing moment, something between us shifted. What started as a simple drink between two lonely people began to feel like something more. The idea of right and wrong faded away like it didn't matter anymore. Before I realized it, we were back at my house. The warm light of the living room lamp softened the room, but it couldn't hide the tension between us. One drink turned into two, then three, and the alcohol only added to the connection growing between us. His hand brushed mine as he reached for his glass, and that small touch sent a wave through me. We exchanged a look that said more than words ever could, and suddenly, the space between us disappeared. That night, lost in loneliness and longing, we gave in to the feelings that had been building. For the first time in years, I felt wanted. It was like a part of me that had been empty for so long was finally filled. But even in the moment, I felt guilt creeping in. The joy of being wanted came with the heavy realization of what I had done. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about him. We kept seeing each other in secret, and every time I was with him, I felt torn. On one hand, I was falling for him. On the other, the shame of what we were doing was unbearable. I knew this was wrong, yet I couldn't pull myself away. The guilt consumed me. I thought about Lisa and how I had betrayed her. How could I care for someone who had once been part of her life? Every time he looked at me, it felt like I was stealing something that wasn't mine to take. My heart raced with excitement, but my conscience screamed at me to stop. The conflict inside me became too much. I couldn't sleep and my thoughts wouldn't stop. I questioned everything, my choices, my role as a mother, and whether I had the strength to end this. But no matter how much I wanted to escape, I found myself sinking deeper into this forbidden connection, unable to break free from the emotions that tied me to him. Weeks later, something felt off. Constant nausea, exhaustion, and a strange, overwhelming sense that my body was no longer my own. A visit to the doctor confirmed the unthinkable. I was pregnant. The news hit me like a brick wall, leaving me frozen in the sterile, suffocating stillness of the examination room. I was carrying the child of a man who had once been my daughter's boyfriend. The weight of that realization left me paralyzed. My mind spiraled, overwhelmed by guilt, fear, and confusion. How had I let it come to this? What had I done? The shame was unbearable, gnawing at my very core. What could I do now? The idea of telling Lisa was unthinkable. She would never forgive me, and I couldn't bear to see her shattered by my betrayal. Telling him felt just as impossible. Would he step up, or would he disappear and leave me to face this nightmare alone? I found myself pacing endlessly in my apartment, my thoughts a tangled mess of regret and dread. Every time I looked in the mirror, I hated the person staring back at me. I didn't couldn't recognize myself anymore. The decision weighed on me day and night, a constant tug of war between keeping the baby or ending the pregnancy. Some nights, I'd sit alone, clutching my stomach and trying to imagine what bringing this life into the world would mean. Other nights, I'd cry myself to sleep, wishing everything would just disappear. I wanted so badly to erase my mistakes, to undo the choices that had led me here, but the storm in my mind wouldn't let me go. Before I could make a decision, Lisa blindsided me with shocking news of her own. She had gotten back together with him. The words knocked the air out of my lungs, leaving me hollow and stunned. The emotions I'd been trying so hard to bury, jealousy, guilt, and heartbreak, came crashing down on me all at once. How could she go back to him, the man who had shared something so forbidden with me? How could she unknowingly bring my shame to life, forcing me to face it every time I saw them together? The guilt became unbearable, a weight I couldn't carry. It pushed me deeper into the only escape I knew, drinking. Alcohol became both a refuge and a punishment, numbing the pain while reminding me of how far I'd fallen. Each drink blurred the edges of reality, but it couldn't erase the truth of what I'd done, or the life growing inside me. The pregnancy haunted me, a constant reminder of the chaos I had created. I couldn't imagine bringing a child into this mess, couldn't fathom the complications it would bring. The shame and fear consumed me, and in my haze of self-destruction, I decided to terminate the pregnancy. I thought it would free me, that it might lift the crushing weight of my guilt and allow me to start over. The procedure felt cold and distant, as though it was happening to someone else. I went through the motions, disconnected from the reality of what was happening. But once it was over, the emotional fallout was devastating. My days became a blur of self-destruction, and I felt myself sinking deeper into despair. The walls of my world closed in, tighter and tighter, until it felt like I couldn't breathe. The decision I had made didn't bring the freedom I had hoped for. It only added another layer of guilt and regret to the chaos that had already consumed my life. One night, drunk and stumbling, I shoved open the door and froze at the scene in front of me. The room was dimly lit, but there was no mistaking what I saw. Lisa and him, tangled together on the couch, their bodies pressed against each other in the unmistakable intimacy of sex. The sound of their heavy breathing and soft murmurs filled the air, cutting through me like a jagged knife. For a moment, I couldn't move. My legs felt as though they'd turned to stone, and my chest tightened so painfully it was as if I couldn't take in air. The alcohol coursing through my veins made the betrayal burn hotter and sharper, magnifying every detail. The sight was seared into my mind. Her bare skin, his hands on her, their closeness. My stomach churned and my heart shattered into pieces I couldn't pick up. Images of Lisa as a little girl flashed in my head, the innocent laughter, the way she used to climb into my lap for comfort, the bond we'd once shared. And now, that same Lisa was here, lost to me in a way I couldn't reconcile. She wasn't my little girl anymore, and the man I had foolishly allowed into our lives had taken a part of her that wasn't his to take. Jealousy and anger coursed through me, hot and suffocating. My hands shook as my mind raced to comprehend the scene before me. I couldn't see straight. I couldn't think straight. All I knew was the gut-wrenching betrayal that twisted in my chest like a cruel blade. Their closeness was a mockery, a cruel reminder of everything I had destroyed in my life and could never have again. I don't even remember crossing the room. One moment I was frozen in place, and the next, I was opening the drawer where I kept the gun. My mind wasn't working. My actions were fueled by raw, unfiltered emotion. Pain, jealousy, rage. They all collided into a single, uncontrollable force. My hands trembled as I aimed the gun, the barrel unsteady as I pointed it at him. "Stop!" I screamed, but my voice cracked and wavered. They turned to look at me, their shocked faces blurred through the tears streaming down my face. I wanted him to hurt, to feel even a shred of the agony ripping through me. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think at all. The alcohol in my system had dulled every rational part of me, leaving only the storm behind. And then it happened. A deafening bang rang out, cutting through the thick, suffocating air. For a second, I couldn't understand what had happened. My vision was hazy, my ears ringing, my mind struggling to catch up. And then I saw her, Lisa, crumpled on the floor, her body lifeless and still. "No, no, no," I whispered, dropping the gun as I stumbled forward, falling to my knees beside her. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached for her, my voice breaking into sobs. "Lisa, please wake up, please." I clutched her hand, my tears dripping onto her pale skin, my cries echoing in the silence. The man stood frozen, his face pale and horrified, but I couldn't look at him. I couldn't look at anything but her. I begged her to come back, to open her eyes, to give me one last chance to make things right, but no amount of pleading could undo what I had done. The weight of it crushed me, the guilt, the regret, the unbearable knowledge that I had destroyed everything in a single, drunken moment. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by my ragged sobs. I had lost everything, my daughter, my sanity, my soul. All that remained was the wreckage of a life I could never piece back together. Lisa survived, but the damage was immense. That night, the sirens of the ambulance and police cut through the chaos. Medics worked quickly to stabilize her fragile body, loading her into the ambulance, while officers put me in handcuffs. I stood there in disbelief, unable to comprehend the horror of what I had done. As I watched Lisa, unconscious and surrounded by tubes and machines, the reality hit me like a tidal wave. She was fighting for her life because of me. At the hospital, Lisa slipped into a coma, leaving me to face the weight of my actions. I was taken to jail, arrested, and charged. In court, the cold, unyielding atmosphere only deepened my despair. When the verdict came, it sealed my fate. Locked behind bars, I was left alone with my thoughts. Regret consumed me, each moment replaying endlessly in my mind. The silence of my cell was deafening, broken only by the echoes of everything I had lost. Every day reminded me of the life I had destroyed, not just Lisa's but my own. I wished desperately for a chance to undo it all, to make a different choice. But the damage wasn't only physical. I had shattered the bond between us, perhaps beyond repair. The guilt was a constant weight on my chest, suffocating me as I sat in the wreckage of my past. Months later, Lisa woke up in the hospital. The room was sterile and unfamiliar, the steady hum of machines a constant reminder of her condition. Her body was weak, her movements slow, and her mind foggy. Recovery was painfully slow, each day bringing back small fragments of her memory. Faces blurred, voices felt distant, and clarity came in brief, fleeting moments. Over time, she began piecing together what had happened, and the weight of it all settled over her like a heavy fog, forcing her to confront the painful truth. One afternoon, as she sifted through belongings from home, she found a letter tucked inside an old box. The familiar handwriting on the folded paper caught her attention. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it, the soft crinkle of the paper breaking the heavy silence of the room. As she read, her breath hitched, the words unraveling a story she had never known. The letter was addressed to him, the man she had once loved. It began innocently enough but quickly turned into a raw confession. Her mother's feelings for him spilled across the page, each word a blow to Lisa's already fragile heart. Then she read the revelation that shattered her completely. Her mother had been pregnant with his child. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just betrayal. It was the destruction of everything she thought she knew about her family and her mother. Tears blurred the ink as she read, her hands trembling with a mix of rage and heartbreak. The foundation of her life had been ripped away, leaving her adrift in a sea of unanswered questions. How could her mother do this to her? How could the woman who was supposed to protect and love her cause so much pain? The questions swirled in her mind like a storm, refusing to settle. As much as it hurt, Lisa knew she couldn't move forward without answers. The betrayal was incomprehensible, but she needed to confront her mother to begin piecing together the shattered remains of her trust and her life. Lisa came to visit me in jail, determined to confront me. The air between us felt heavy, weighed down by years of unresolved pain and betrayal. Her eyes burned with anger, but beneath it, I could see the raw, unhealed hurt she was trying to hide. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tremble of emotion underneath. "Why?" she began, her words cutting through me like knives. "Why did you do this? How could you betray me like that? Wasn't it enough that Dad left us? Did you have to destroy everything else too?" Her words hit me hard, each one a blow to the fragile wall of denial I had built around myself. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked down, unable to meet her gaze. My voice cracked as I spoke. I don't have an excuse, Lisa," I admitted, my hands trembling. "I was weak. I was lonely, drowning in my own despair, and I let myself cross a line I can never take back." She stared at me, her face a mix of disbelief anger and deep sadness. Her silence pressed on me as I confessed everything. I told her about the emptiness I had felt, how addiction had numbed me to everything except the fleeting attention I got from him. I told her about the pregnancy, how I had been consumed by guilt, shame, and confusion, and how I knew I had gone too far. My voice broke as I said the words I had been dreading the most. Lisa, I loved him. I knew it was wrong. I knew it would destroy us, but I let it happen. And now I've lost you because of it. The room went silent. The weight of her silence was unbearable as I waited for her to respond, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold and distant, like she was speaking to a stranger. You didn't just lose me, she said, her tone steady but sharp. You broke me. Her words left me shattered. There was nothing more to say, no way to undo the damage I had caused. The silence between us stretched, heavy with pain and finality, as the full extent of what I had done settled over us both. She stood there, her emotions swirling, a storm of anger, confusion, and sorrow threatening to overwhelm her. As the visit came to an end, she rose from her chair, her fists clenched at her sides, her body tense with the weight of everything left unsaid. At the exit, she hesitated, turning back to look at me one last time. Our eyes met. Hers was filled with questions I couldn't answer, and mine were begging for forgiveness I knew I didn't deserve. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, a single tear slipped down her cheek. She quickly turned away, her footsteps echoing through the cold, empty corridor as she walked out of my life. The silence that followed was crushing. It was the kind of silence that made every regret louder, every unspoken word heavier. The bond between us, once so strong, now felt irreparably broken. There was no forgiveness in her final glance, no closure in her silence, only the acknowledgement that some wounds cut too deep to ever fully heal, that some betrayals are too great to overcome. As the metal doors closed behind her, I was left alone with the unbearable weight of my choices. The ache in my chest was overwhelming, a constant reminder of a love that had been destroyed by my own actions. The quiet of the room seemed to mock me, amplifying the emptiness that would now define the rest of my life.